Good morning, everybody. Hello. How are we all doing? Happy Sunday. Welcome to another episode of Tarot Deep Dive. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Dustin, and this channel, Modern Metaphysicae, is about all things occult and esoteric related, and with a very heavy lean on the tarot. In this series, the Tarot Deep Dive series, we take a look at the artistic visual evolution of the Major Arcana, as well as diving into how the divinatory meanings of the cards changed over time. And then we break down the symbolism in each of the cards in the Rider-Waite Smith pack. So pull up a chair with a cozy blanket because it's getting cold out, and a cup of tea or coffee, and we're going to dive into the Temperance card today. So yeah, good morning, good morning. I see there's lots of chatter about tea and coffee in chat, which I love to see. One of when we launch memberships, I will definitely make sure that there is a like coffee emote mug and a tea emote like mug kind of thing for the exclusive emotes, because I feel like we need those in this channel. Um, so yeah, good morning, good morning. As always, with all of my live streams, if you guys have a question or a comment or anything you would like me to see or read, please be sure to do at Modern Metaphysicae in chat, or put it all in capital letters so I don't miss it. Sometimes things can get a little crazy. So, yeah, I hope everyone's doing well. I'm excited for today. I did put the finishing touches on this blog post last night. It's been a little bit of a crazy week. Things are getting back to normal, though, which is good. Get some more caffeine in me. So yeah, I hope everybody's ready to dive into some temperance today. The last of our cardinal virtues. With all of the deep dive series, I do write an accompanying blog post. So if you're interested in checking that out or following along, you can use it for notes, whatever. You can head over to my website, which is linked down in the description box below. If you're watching this live, there should also be a pinned comment to the top of chat where the link to the blog post is. But if you just head on over to my website, you can scroll down to the bottom here and you'll find it in the most recent blog posts, or you can just click on blog at the top and it will be the very newest one. So yeah, let's dive in to Temperance. Good morning. Hello. I know a lot of people have been asking when's the next tarot deep dive, and we had to miss last month's because of a scheduling snafu. So I'm excited. The next few ones are going to be intense. We're moving into the deep energies. But before we do that, we've got little Miss Temperance to talk about today. Which much like Rachel Pollack, is not one of my. It's not a card that excites me terribly. I believe she said something to that effect in her book, the Tarot Wisdom book. She makes some comments about how it's not a very exciting card. Like, yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. So yeah, let's dive into the Tarot Temperance card today. Temperance, cardinal virtue, which lent her name to the historical movement dedicated to promoting moderation, complete abstinence of alcohol, right, is a familiar sort of trope that we see and are familiar with in the Western world. Although it is a concept and an idea or an ideal that is valued across the globe. And hopefully, if you've watched previous episodes of this, you're starting to see a trend, right? Where I say something like, it's probably really popular in Western culture, and then everywhere else it's also popular, right? So these are universalities in the human condition that we see across cultures, across religions, across time, right? And temperance is another concept like this. We see it completely delineated in the sort of Judeo-Christian tradition with the four cardinal virtues, but the idea of temperance comes up in Buddhism, it comes up in Hinduism, it comes up in Jainism, and a number of world religions from east to west. And so, again, I hope you guys are starting to pick up on this idea that the Major Arcana really is a representation of the human condition and those ideals and concepts that really are universal to us as a species, regardless of where we are. And it's important to remember, too, that at the time the tarot developed, the time the imagery was selected, in Italy, in Renaissance Italy, where when it comes to the tarot that we're familiar with today, right? And I want to emphasize this because there is a lot of incorrect information out there about the history of tarot. I still see people, excuse me, coffee break. I still see people attributing tarot to Egyptian origins, which we have proved now academically and historically to not be true. I still see people attributing to the images being placed on tarot to not not basically the Mediterranean Renaissance areas, which is the oldest historical decks that we have available. Obviously, there could very well be older decks that represent some of these cards that we're not familiar with. Obviously, the Mamluk is a proto-tarot, but there is still a lot of incorrect information out there in terms of the history and origin of the tarot. Even just the symbolism alone. One book that I do reference on occasion because it has some good stuff in it, but also it just has some complete nonsense, as this book, right? The Ultimate Guide to the Rider-Waite Tarot. There is some really good factual symbolic representation sort of definitions in here, and then there's some that it's just like, where did that even come from? So reader beware. Just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's true, right? Anyways, so back to the talk, right? I hope everyone is getting a sense of the idea that the Major Arcana, right, really is universal, right, to the human condition, and that it's very clear that these images, these tropes, these concepts and ideals were selected because of that. Okay. Now, when we're talking specifically about temperance, right, the traditional sort of Judeo-Christian depiction of temperance, and here we have this. I think this is a fresco, if I remember correctly. My art history teacher, my Renaissance art history teacher, will punch me right now. This is I believe this is an egg tempera piece on a wood panel. It's a part of an altar set of 4 panels depicting the cardinal virtues, all in the same thing. And it's funny because in art history, or in art school, in my drawing classes, when I was taking figure drawing, this image specifically was used quite often to discuss proportion and foreshortening, which is the term that we use to describe how you draw something that is long, like a leg, but when you're looking at it, like when you're looking at my finger right head on, it only looks like it's this long, but in reality it's that long, right? So that's the term in art that we use to talk about foreshortening, that technique of drawing something that's kind of coming straight at you when it's longer than that. Okay, so because every time I see this image, like when you look at her, she's got like giant legs. Like if you actually look at this image, she has got some thunder thighs when you look at like the proportion of her body, and her waist is like really high up, right? And like she's bending like at a place that we don't really bend at. Like, it's a beautiful image, right? It's almost like the figure was standing, right, at one point, and then the artist or the patron decided, no, we want her seated, right? Because if she was standing, she if you kind of look, if you follow, this would be kind of her butt, right? And then her dress would go down, and the feet are still quite in the same position. And I don't know if any x-rays have been done of this piece, but I would love for them to do that, because it definitely looks as if this was painted on at a later point, and the choice was made to have her be seated. And so now she's got these, so her waist is kind of up here, but she's bending like at the top of her thighs. It's crazy. It's just crazy. I love this piece because this is the kind of thing that when you really start looking at art, right? Art does not exist without us, the viewer, right? That's the beautiful thing about art, right? I really want that to sink in for a minute, right? That was the most profound thing I ever learned in art school. Art does not exist without us, the human observing the art. Whether it's visual arts in terms of painting and sculpture and architecture, or it's performance arts, whether it's music or theater or film or television, right? Without the observer, you, the observer, are as much a part of art as the art is. And that's really important to remember, okay? And so when you start to learn how to really look and see what you're looking at and start observing things, you'll start to notice things. Not only will you notice these little I can't even speak today. Intrinsicies. I can't say that word. It is 10:30 here. It is well, it's 10:46 in the morning here. You'll start to notice these little things, these little details, right? But you'll also start to notice things like this, where it's kind of like, wait a minute, like this person originally was painted standing. Like, they have to be, because I know that the body doesn't do that. Like, we don't bend there, and her legs are really freaking long, if that's actually her legs. And man, her thighs are huge then, right? So not only do you notice those things, but then you start to notice the symbolism. You start to notice the color choices. You start to see the through line of language that art has used for a long time, long before people became very literate, right? So that's the thing I want to drive home about this. But this is really the traditional sort of image that we are used to seeing of temperance, right? We see this woman pouring liquid from one vessel to another. And this has a long-standing history that goes all the way back to ancient Greco-Roman times, okay? And this was the practice of diluting wine with water, right? Obviously, let's go back to world history in middle school, everybody. In in ancient times and in the Middle Ages and even through the Renaissance, water treatment was not a thing. If you were walking around the streets of London or Paris at any point in those historical times, people would quite literally be dumping buckets of feces and urine out their windows into the streets. It was not a very sanitary period in history, and so typically if you lived anywhere within a reasonable distance of a city or a town, you did not trust the water, unless it was like a spring perhaps. Even still, you probably didn't trust it, because oftentimes it would make you sick and you would die, right? So one of the ways that people kept from getting sick from drinking water was that they would make it into beer, right? Or they would make wine. But obviously, if you're drinking beer and wine all day long, you're just going to be wasted, right? You're just going to be a drunkard. And that's not a good thing either. So a lot of times, they found that you could dilute the alcoholic beverage with water. The alcohol that was in the beverage would therefore then sterilize the water, right? That you were adding to it, and you also would not get drunk as quickly, right? So this fundamental idea of temperance comes all the way back from Greco-Roman times, where you see the woman diluting the wine with water, okay? And there is some association with purification here, right? That idea of purifying the water through the combining it with wine, right? The idea of making sure that it's safe to drink, of being of moderation, right? Of control, right? Those ideas are kind of universal with with this sort of trope, with this allegory that we see, right? Let me catch up on chat here. Michelle says she does seem really huge in general. Her shoulders are well above the. Yeah. The proportions on this are just absolutely bonkers crazy. Like if she actually is shaped like this, she would be a bizarre. But that's why I am inclined to believe that at one point in history, or at one point during the painting of this piece, she was standing, right? Because if you follow the line down, right, you can see that her feet still line up. But at some point, it looks like they decided, oh, no, we want her seated. But in reality, right, the seat should be up here where she should be bending, right, at her waist, right? Because this is high, right? So this is just below her breast. So her waist and her hips are probably right around here. But she's bending way down here, which is just not, it's not natural. But you start to notice these things, right? Let's see. I've been thinking about people dumping. Oh, yeah. Now, it should be noted that the historically we do know, like, Hollywood likes to over dramatize the idea of people just dumping their piss pots out the window in the morning. That generally didn't happen, and it was actually kind of frowned upon. Like, people liked pleasant smells, right? People burned incense, they liked perfume oils and things like that. People, people still, even back then, enjoyed pleasant smells and aromas, right? The whole idea of disease spreading through miasmas, right, of unpleasant smells was a thing. So it's not to say that, like, every day if you woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning you would just see people flinging poo out their window, right? Like that's actually not true. It did happen, right? People, I'm sure, did do it, but most people would take and place their piss pots out in the morning, and that urine would actually be collected by the city and used to be made into ammonia, which would then be used to wash linens and things like that, right? It would be passed through straw with ash, right? And then it would be turned into ammonia, which would then be used as a detergent. So there's very well documented evidence right through, right even during the Middle Ages of the city of London, for example, operating these operations where they would go around and collect people's pee for these kinds of purposes. And then a lot of times when it came to your other things, they would take it down. You would carry it in a bucket down to a stream or a river that was near you, one of the channels that they would cut from the Thames, or you would take it down to the Thames and you dump it in the Thames. And that would, of course, the Thames back then was just ripe, one might say. But yeah. Princess What's Her Name asks, is there any connection between temperance and the biblical story of Jesus turning water into wine? So there, one can make connections there, obviously. Temperance historically goes much further back than that, like I said. Obviously there is some connection there. There is some allegorical through line that we can draw. I don't think that there's anyone that's ever explicitly said yes or no, and obviously I don't think we can say that, but definitely. West Star Tarot says, in Pompeii there was actually a public laundry where the detergent was urine. Yep, they would use urine. Urine was, and to this day people still do this. In fact, in more in less fortunate countries, right, where things like detergent aren't easily accessible, and people, there's tons of historical living experiments, which is really fun to look at. If you've never kind of looked into that, you should. But there are tons of archaeologists and things like that instead of like going and digging in the dirt, they go and they reconstruct historical like farms or villages and things like that, and they live for like a whole year in that time period, meaning that they don't have cell phones or internet or anything like that. They grow their own food, they make their own detergent, and what you make that from, what a lot of people used was ammonia, right? And the best way to get ammonia is to take stale urine, and you basically fill up like a big barrel with hay or straw, specifically straw, not hay, to use it as like a filter, and then you put wood ash down it, right? And for those of you who are well versed in chemistry, at the end of the day, when you filter your stale urine through that, you will end up with ammonia, and then that can be used as a detergent, which is also a whitening agent for linen, which was the most common textile during those periods. So Taro and Witcher says, yeah, I saw them make this on the Tudor Farm. Great show. Yes, the Tudor Farm is wonderful. So is the Tales from the Green Valley, which is the same cast, by the way, and is my favorite. Well, cast, I shouldn't say cast. The same group of historians who live that way. So, yep. Fun stuff. Okay, now that we've had our lovely morning conversation about poop and pee, let's continue on with our discussion of temperance. So yeah, like, you know, this allegory, right? This idea of purifying the drinking water, of moderation and control, right? So you're not getting drunk, goes all the way back to ancient Greece. Okay, you know, there's tons of extant archaeological pottery that we see figures pouring water into what is known as craters, the bowl that was used to dilute the wine. Okay, so fun stuff. Now, to kind of go back to what I was talking about earlier, there obviously is an association here with the idea of purification, right? As historically water was not consumed because of the danger of becoming ill and dying from diseases that were carried in the water. And so there is a kind of a symbolic representation of purification here, right? So definitely keep that in mind as we keep talking about that. Now, interestingly enough, this kind of this representation of temperance, right? This woman pouring a liquid from one vessel to another is the kind of the standard, right? I use that term loosely. The go-to allegorical art representation for temperance. However, there's one that doesn't get a lot of airtime, I should say, and is actually intriguing to me. And I personally feel that Pamela Coleman Smith definitely references this in her work. But another traditional depiction of temperance is this one, right, where she is holding a bridle. Okay, interestingly enough. And we have a couple different examples of that here. Here is one from an illuminated manuscript where she has a clock on her head and she's standing on a windmill, right? And those obviously have symbolic representation as well, right? But you can see that she quite literally has the bit in her mouth, right? And I love this beautiful temperance here at the bottom in this glorious calligraphy. But you know, like this sort of ideal, right? So for example, in this one, right, she's holding glasses in her hands, right? So this is a perfect example of how imagery was used to convey lots of ideas and concepts and things like that. So she's holding a pair of glasses in her hands, right? So glasses really are there to give her clear vision, right? Because when one is drunk, when one is what's the word I'm looking for? When you're intoxicated, right? You don't see clearly. Your judgment's clouded, right? So she's also holding the horse's bridle, which is a traditional symbol of keeping one from speaking evil, right? So it's that kind of idea, if you don't have anything nice to say, just keep your fucking mouth shut, right? Like that's the one of the origins of that, and one of the ways that this was conveyed in art history was through the use of the symbol of the bridle. Okay, so if you see bridles in historical paintings, the artist is telling you something. Okay, and then of course we have the windmill, right, which is the idea of maintaining an even pace. When we think about a windmill, right, it spins, it just does its thing, right? It's a very almost meditative kind of thing. Now they're very dangerous. If you've ever actually like been to like a historical windmill, they're kind of crazy and like just mind blowing technology for the time. But that idea of that consistent, steady pacing of the turning of the windmill that then turns the mechanism inside, that then turns the stones that grinds the wheat, right? That idea of slow and steady and just doing what needs to get done and not being in a hurry to get to do the basic everyday thing, right, of grinding wheat into flour in order to make bread in order to live, right? That's kind of the idea that's being represented here, okay, right? And then the clock on our head obviously is to be mindful of time, right? Don't rush, stay in the moment, those kinds of ideas. And those have gone right back through history, right? We see those kinds of symbols popping up time and time and time again, okay? So that's actually one of my favorite representations of temperance. And I definitely think, if we look especially here, we can see some symbols, maybe the triangle here that pops up in the Rider-Waite, right? Yes. So we can definitely see, you can see, and that's the one thing that I really love about Pamela Coleman Smith's work, is you can see that the woman knew art history, that she definitely took the time to study imagery of the past and understand it, and understand the allegories and the symbols and things like that were being placed in these images by artists during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and how she could then use that same visual language within the deck that she was creating with Arthur Edward Waite. So interesting imagery of temperance that we don't see all that often. She doesn't get a lot of airtime, so I wanted to really bring that up. Now that being said, right, there's like a little fly zipping around my head right now. Go on, shoot. Michelle says, no cell phones, no internet. The first part of my life was a historical experiment. Yeah, mine too. I remember a time before cell phones and internet. I remember when we got the internet. Oh, don't make me feel old. Good morning, everybody just coming in. Hello. All right. And again, if you guys have questions or anything, feel free to throw them up in chat. Yeah. Speaking of like growing up in a historical experiment, like I used to ride around in the back of pickup trucks. Could you imagine? With no seatbelts? Oh my goodness. I still made it. I'm still here, by the way. All right. So to kind of continue this idea of temperance, like what did temperance mean, right? Where do these ideas of temperance come from? And let's just talk about kind of the etymology of the word, right? In medieval times, when people were talking about the body, right? Obviously, science was not at its forte, one might say. It was believed that the health of your body was determined by the balance of 4 tempers or 4 humors, those being black bile, poo, yellow bile, urine, blood, and phlegm, which were white liquids. Yes, that includes the sexual ones, for those that are wondering. I should have like rated this one PG. Like we've been talking a lot of like stuff that we just don't normally talk about on this channel. So, anyways, so the in historically, right? The when you went and saw a doctor, like when you look at historical paintings. Or historical images of doctors, typically you see them like holding up an alembic, a glass thing. Let me see if I can find an example of this because I should have. Because I think it's very relevant to the discussion. Here we go. Okay, so when we look at like old paintings of doctors, one of the common there we go. One of the common depictions that we see is something like this, right? The doctor's quite literally holding an alembic of pee up to the light. He's looking at it, right? He's like, "Oh, what's going on in your pee?" Now, this was because it was thought that if your humors were out of balance, meaning that you had too much yellow bile or too much black bile or too much blood or too much phlegm in your body, that's what was causing you to lose your temper. And that's actually where that phrase comes from. So when you look at someone and you say don't lose your temper, right? What you're telling them is don't get sick. Don't don't get so angry, because they did associate anger and things like that with being ill, right? So you're telling them don't get sick, right? Don't lose your temper, because don't wet yourself. It's kind of like one of those one of those sayings. It's fun to think about. But they believed, right, that if you found these out of balance, and again, here we have that idea of balance, of moderation, of things in working together, right, of all of the liquids of life having to be in work in unison, right? That's why in the Middle Ages, if they thought that you had too much blood, too much of that humor, they would bleed you with leeches, or they would cut into you and things like that. Obviously, we know this not to be true anymore, right? Science has evolved a little bit. But it is fascinating to think about the origin of the ideas of temperance and the word temper and things like that. So, yeah. Fun stuff. Fun stuff. Now, the modern kind of way we use the word temper definitely kind of aligns more with that idea of temperament, of someone's sort of attitude or mood, for example. In Latin, temporo, which is kind of the Latin root of the word, means restraint from anger, and that's kind of where we get that. More broadly, the proper balance or mixing of compounds, as we see it used in alchemy and, for example, in the tempering of alloys in metallurgy, is where we get phrases like to temper steel, right? And things like that. So, and that's the process, obviously, of heating and cooling metals as you work with them in order to strengthen them or get them to exhibit a specific quality. So, and that's kind of how we use it today, right? But you can see a through line there. You can see a through line of moderation, of control, right? That idea of control. And it's controlling oneself or controlling something from extremes, right? When we're talking, even just when we're talking about tempering steel in order to make, a really strong blade, for example, it's about controlling specific elements in order to strengthen and make something better. Okay. And that is a allegorical through line that we see that goes all the way back to, Greco-Roman times, where we have that fundamental ideal allegorical representation of the woman pouring water from one vessel to another. So, yeah. Okay. So, before we move on to the visual evolution of the cards, are there any questions about the sort of art historical perspective I've provided to you guys today? Temperance being the last of the four cardinal virtues. We've talked about the virtues in previous episodes, including strength, the hanged man, which a lot of people associate with prudence. Sometimes prudence is often associated with the hermit card as well. And even sometimes it's even kind of lumped in with temperance, interestingly enough. Prudence kind of got the shaft in the tarot, in the modern tarot. She really didn't get like the sort of due respect that she deserves as being a cardinal virtue. um, and then, of course, we have justice, right? Justice being the last of our cardinal virtues. So, okay. I'm just catching up on chat here, making sure. Good morning, everyone coming in. Hello, Lisa. Hello, Kay. Gina begged her parents to get cable for MTV, and that was a flat no. Oh no. I remember when we got cable. I was really excited. I was very young though, and we got the Disney Channel, and I was pumped. I was like, "Oh my god, Disney Channel!" I blame that for how I turned out today. That and the scene in Neverending Story, where Artax is stuck in the swamp. Yep. All right. So let's dive into the visual evolution of the card. How are we doing on time, by the way? Oh, we're doing great. We are doing great. Okay. Visual evolution of the card. So, Temperance, interestingly enough, is one of the cards that we definitely see some, what's the word I'm looking for? Some change in how the card is represented. So when we're looking at the early Italian decks, and here we have, of course, the Visconti Sforza, which is one of the most complete extant historical decks that we have. We are given the very classical allegory of temperance as a cardinal virtue. So you have this woman pouring liquid. The liquid, you really can't see. It was probably gilt with silver, which has come off over the ages, but you can kind of catch like a hint of it going across, her shoulder or her hair there. So if you look very carefully right here, right there, you'll see this line. And that was probably gilt in silver. These cards are actually gilt in gold, by the way, for those of you who may not know. They're very expensive and hand painted with tempera paints and gouache. It's like a mix of tempera and gouache. There's resins in the paint they found. It's not quite modern equivalents, but anyways, we have a very traditional depiction of temperance as a cardinal virtue. I love her socks. Can we talk about her socks for a moment? Because they just make me happy. They're obviously stockings, which are kind of pulled down, and they're showing her leg, which is really interesting, right? So you have this idea of temptation. So this woman kind of showing her mid calf there is actually kind of racy for the period, right? And a lot of people, I think, miss this when they're talking about this card historically. But her stockings are definitely pulled down. And there is a sense of temptation there. And obviously that word temptation is something that we associate with, it has its origins and roots in the word temperance, right? So being able to moderate yourself, being able to control yourself, right? And that was a big part of temperance, especially during the Renaissance period, where there was kind of a little bit of a sexual revolution, right? We're talking about a period in which courtesans exist, right? If you read the sort of the, we're lagging. Oh no. Uh-oh. Let me know if give me just, it looks like we're having some connection issues. All right. We're just going to let everything kind of catch up and give it a moment. It's having a moment. YouTube is having a moment. That's okay. We'll give YouTube a moment. We're just going to give it a moment. Everybody sip some coffee. We're here still. YouTube's having a little bit of a hiccup. We will get this sorted out. Don't worry. We're still here. We didn't disconnect. We're good. Okay, everything seems to have stabilized. Excellent. I did drop the resolution just to give it a minute, so we're just going to give it a minute, and then I'll try and bump it back up, and see if it doesn't cause any issues. Looks like we're back. We're back in. We're doing okay. We're doing okay. Yay, we're back. Hello. Yeah, it looks like YouTube was having some issues there. We're okay. We're all okay. We're still here. We're still going to talk about Temperance. Don't you worry. Thank you for being patient, everyone, as we had that little technical hiccup. Hopefully that's the only one that we will have. All right. So back to our good old lady friend here, who's showing a little bit of leg. Obviously, she's pouring that liquid from one container or vessel to another. She's kind of dressed in this blue dress with red sleeves, with stars all over it. She's, interestingly enough, kind of perched in front of a cliff, which is different, right? And she doesn't have wings, right? Which, when we kind of go forward in time, when we start looking at the French decks, we see the addition of wings. And here we have a very overt emphasis on her breasts, right? So you start to see this association of Temperance with the idea of sort of femininity, of fertility, right? And things like that. So there's an association with that. Obviously, we also see this connection to the divine aspect of the feminine, the divine feminine, appearing here, right? With the inclusion of the wings. This from the Dedal Tarot, right? As we move forward into Pappas, we kind of have this Isis representation of again, that classic allegory of Temperance. We still have that kind of liquid being poured from one vessel to another, and of course, in true Pappas form, everything's got to be super Egyptian, right? And then when we get to Waite, we have quite the transformation, right? We have this huge inclusion of what's the words I'm looking for, of occult symbolism and mysticism being sort of imparted onto the card. Obviously, we see that in the Golden Dawn card, which precedes Waite, but Waite kind of brings that to the forefront. And then when we get to Crowley, of course, Crowley, our dear friend Alistair, is not known for his temperance in much of anything. So it should come as no surprise that when he was making his own tarot deck, he was like, yeah, no, temperance is out. And we're going to change that to art. And so when we're talking about temperance, right, in terms of the Thoth tarot, we see in his depiction, right, we see this depiction where it has been changed to art, and there's obvious associations with alchemy and sort of the divine creation, and there's some Artemis references and all kinds of symbolism and things being thrown in, Latin in the back, things like that. So yeah. Elkins asks, is there precedence for masculine or androgynous temperance before RWS? Not exactly, but Waite does discuss that in Pictorial Key, so we'll get to that when we start talking about the symbols specifically in the RWS. So, all right. Looks like everything has returned to normal. Micah says, I've been having problems uploading to YouTube. It will finish them. Yeah. Yeah, YouTube's been having some issues lately. Why did they make their wings red? Specifically, we will talk specifically about why the angel's wings in the Waite card are red when we break down the symbolism. Are there any other questions? So, I mean, when we're talking about the visual evolution of the card, right, we can see that classical allegory that we see of temperance that goes all the way back to antiquity, there is a through line there, right? From the earliest cards to the newest. We still have, even when we look all the way at even modern decks, we still have that idea of, liquids being poured from one vessel to another. But this like layering of divine and occult symbolism seems to get added, especially after Pappas. Pappas kind of makes that association with with Isis, and then we see sort of goddess representations or divine representations and angels and things like that after the French sort of slapped the wings on the traditional symbol of the virtues. But that was very true of the period when we're talking about when like the Marseille and things like that were being developed. The virtues art historically began to appear with wings, and instead of just being like temporal female figures like we saw in Renaissance Italy, we definitely started to see in French art where the ideas of the cardinal virtues, which were the big sort of ideals that you wanted to adhere to, got wings in order to kind of emphasize the divinity, the holiness of adhering to those ideologies, right? Of temperance and justice and fortitude or strength and prudence, things like that. Okay. So that is our visual evolution. How are the temperance and the star related if they are? If you see both in a reading, is there a particular significance to that? I don't want to get into that too much. I plan on talking about that a little bit when we get to the star card. There is definitely a connection to the two, but they are very different in terms of their meaning, right? So, I'll just leave it at that. Stay tuned for the star episode. So let's talk about meaning, right? So how the card's meaning evolved over time, right? So when we are talking about Dumoulin in 1781, he entitles the card Temperance. An angel instructs man on the avoidance of death. Well, that's interesting. Instructs man on the avoidance of death. What? That's not temperance as we know it, right? When we get to Levi, and he refers to it as the Hebrew letter Nun, temperance, the heaven of the sun, climates, seasons, motion, changes of life, which is ever new yet ever the same. Well, that's different. We get this like cyclical kind of meaning. Okay, so when we go to Mathers in 1888, temperance, combination, confirmation, uniting. Okay, there's definitely through line kind of forming here. The Golden Dawn in 1896, daughter of the reconcilers, the bringer forth of the life, temperance, combination. So again, we're getting this idea of combination, and this is where we see a lot of the modern sort of takes on the tarot meanings pull from, right? When we get to Waite in 1910, he entitles it Temperance, and he quite literally just says household economy, moderation, frugality, management, and accommodation. Well, this is completely different than what we're used to. But then he goes on and like adds a whole bunch of like other stuff. When we talk about the symbolism, we'll talk about kind of the things he said. And then of course Crowley changes the title of the card from Temperance to Art, and he describes this card as, this card represents the consummation of the royal marriage, which took place in Atu 6. The black and white personages are now united in a single androgynous figure. Even the bees and the serpents on their robes have made an alliance. The red lion has become white and increased in size and importance, while the white eagle, similarly expanded, has become red. He has exchanged his red blood for her white gluten. Parenthetically, this is a direct quote from him, he says, "It is impossible to explain these terms to any but advanced students of alchemy, like classical." Oh, I forgot to close the parentheses. Oh no, typo. So classical Crowley, in the sense that he's like being condescending in his own writing, where he's like, listen, I'm going to tell you what this is, but like you're not going to understand it unless you know alchemy. Now obviously when we look at Crowley's card, we can see there is a crap ton of alchemical representation in this card. We are not going to get into the symbolism today. This is like a whole nother episode, and we would have to like talk about alchemy and all kinds of stuff in the great work. But if you're interested, you can always do your homework, right? So yeah, fun stuff there. So let's break down the card itself, the symbols within the card. So everybody get out your favorite Temperance card so you can follow along. And we'll talk about the symbols. So let's first of all talk about the figure itself, the winged angel. So Waite describes this figure as masculine, but, quote from Pictorial Key to the Tarot, "The figure is neither male nor female." Though Waite never explicitly identifies the angelic figure, many occultists believe this angel to be the angel Gabriel. His red wings, the red wings here that we see that Pamela Coleman Smith drew, denote him to be a member of the seraphim, right? So when we talk about the depiction of angels historically, especially through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, you will see angels with red wings, and these are the seraphim. These red-winged angels, which with the cherubim, are among the first hierarchy, the highest hierarchy of angels next to the throne of God, right? So this is why a lot of occultists believe that this is Gabriel, is because obviously this is the red wings here are there to specifically denote him as a member of the seraphim, or of that highest hierarchy of angels, okay? So that's kind of what Waite gives us in terms of that. Other than that, there's really no primary source material on the figure. He doesn't ever directly say that this is Gabriel, but we can probably inference that through the other sort of clues that Pixie gives us. Okay, let's talk about the sun symbols. So there's a couple sun symbols in this card. Obviously, the first one that a lot of people notice is the setting sun over the mountains. This one, and then there's a second, right? And that is the actual alchemical symbol for the sun here, placed on the sort of the crown, or the head of the angelic figure. In Waite's description of the card, he specifically states that the figure is to have the sign of the sun upon his forehead, right? So that's the sign of the sun on his forehead. The solar symbolism here can be associated with the angel Gabriel, as he is the sort of the messenger angel, the bringer of knowledge. The sun also represents the card's position in the tree of life, and is associated with Tifereth, the central Sephiroth, in which we associate with spirituality, balance, integration, beauty, miracles, and compromise. Compromise being a key word there, right? When we talk about all of these things, we talk about moderation, right? So everything in moderation, right? So again, there's a little bit of a through line association there. Okay. One symbol that a lot of people pick up on, and that I get a lot of questions about frequently, is the squared triangle on his chest. So this symbol is a symbol that is known as a septenary. Okay. Now, the idea of a septenary is it's a group of 7, right? And it's a very, very ancient symbol that we see used over and 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 over again throughout art history. We see it in architecture. We see it in all kinds of different places, right? And it's included here to point out the idea of the combination of all of the virtues, right? So you have the unification of the 7 virtues, the 3 theological and the 4 cardinal. That's kind of the generally accepted meaning of this symbol. Obviously, there's also an association with the tarot itself. We can divide the Major Arcana into 3 septenaries, 3 divisions of 7. So there's some through line there as well in terms of the symbolism. Okay, but it's that idea of the coming together of all of the virtues. Okay, so in order to reach that end goal, right, of the Major Arcana, of spiritual rebirth, of enlightenment, one might say, you have to kind of embody them all. And that's kind of the message that's being added here. Now, when we talk specifically about the vessels, right, the 2 cups pouring liquid from one to the other, right, this again is a traditional representation of the allegory of temperance, diluting wine with water. But in further writings by Waite, he describes this as, quote, the essence of life. So that idea of creation, right, of manifestation, and goes on to describe them as the cleansing waters. And he describes the 2 cups, right, the liquid flowing from one to the other. There are 2 streams if you look very closely at the card. One is the cleansing water and the other is the saving fire. The 2 cups contain grace, benediction, salvation, and mercy alike, right? So it's all of these kind of ideals being passed back and forth between each other, okay? Now the path, right? The path that we have on the bottom sort of left-hand side of the card, this is the path to enlightenment, right? The idea of our journey to better ourselves, right? And this path passes through hills and over mountains and to that sort of setting sun in the background. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the sun symbol earlier, but the path really there is leading to that place, that state of higher consciousness that we can achieve after we've mastered temperance, after we've mastered all of the 7 virtues, right? The mountains, obviously we've talked about mountains in the past. If you're not familiar, we have done a number of other symbols in tarot videos and what's the word I'm looking for? Blog posts. One of those being symbols in tarot earth. So if you're interested specifically more in learning about this symbol, I would highly recommend you check out this blog post, Symbols in Tarot and Earth. We talk a ton about mountains. Temperance is referenced here. And there is a video as well for that. So we won't get into that because we've covered that ad nauseum in that video and that blog post. So go check that out, okay? And then last but not least, well, no, we have a couple more to go through. We have 1 foot on land, 1 foot on water, right? And a lot of people see this this symbol and ask what this is as well. And Waite doesn't actually kind of give us a specific definition, but he describes the figure as standing between 2 worlds, right? And he says, the figure harmonizes the psychic and the material natures, right? So this is kind of that idea of transcendence, right? Of being both of this earthly plane and of a higher spiritual nature, okay? And then on the chest of the angel, and there's a lot of debate whether or not this is actually there or not. I'm of the camp that it is. That is the Tetragrammaton. the forbidden name of God, Yahweh, that we see in the writing above the squared triangle on the figure's chest, right? The Yod He Vav He. A lot of people say, "Oh, this is just Pixie drawing like folds." No, this is very intentional. You can definitely see that it is a Yod He Vav He. And this is again the unspoken or forbidden name of God, and a lot of Orthodox Jews, for example, Kabbalistic Jews, won't even say this name. And it's definitely not something you say in prayer, and it's definitely not something that you use in any kind of ritual or anything like that. But it's interesting here because I think and again, we don't have any primary source information on this. My inclination is that it's included here to kind of emphasize the divine authority of the figure, right? And the divineness that, this is an archangel essentially, and that they are here on the behest of God in order to impart this divine knowledge of temperance to us, right? There's a lot of other kind of miscellaneous interpretations and things like that. But again, we don't have any primary source information from either Waite or Pamela Coleman Smith as to the inclusion of the tetragrammaton here and its specific meaning, other than the general Jewish mysticism and sort of occult knowledge that we have about it from other places. So, and it's one that I think a lot of people miss. Like, a lot of people that are new to tarot would never even look at that and recognize that is there, but it is definitely there. And then last but not least, we have the irises on the bottom right. And the iris is it's a long-standing traditional symbol of messages, of connection, bridges, valor, hope, and peace, right? So again, we get that idea of the coming together of two things, but again, through balance, recognition, moderation, and things like that. So lots and lots of little symbols in this, right? Yeah, there is some debate. There are just with anything, right? But there are some people who say, "Oh, no, that's just folds in the gown," whatever. In my opinion, it's definitely there. I agree with you. So yeah, those are all the major symbols that we see within the deck. Again, we've talked about halos and things like that before, so I don't want to beat those into the ground. Those are some pretty fundamentally basic symbols that I think don't need a ton of explanation. But are there any questions? Do you guys have any questions about our friend Temperance? Because there is a lot in this card, and it's interesting because when we talk about the sort of the allegory of temperance, and then we look at how the card's divinatory meaning evolved, right? The divinatory meaning really kind of started out more as these ideas of change and transformation, and there's almost kind of an alchemical tone to things. The idea of bringing forth life, of fertility, right? And then we get to the post Golden Dawn with Waite and Crowley, and we see kind of the fork in the road where we go back to more ideas of like traditional temperance with Waite, or we really lean heavily into like alchemical references when we look at Crowley's card. So it's really interesting because when we look at the visual evolution of the card, we definitely can see and pick up on that. And it's one of the cards I think in the Major Arcana that has fundamentally been changed the most, interestingly enough, over the course of history in tarot, right? And yeah, it's fascinating. Sometimes it's really interesting to think about, like, well, why this one? Why did they pick this one to change and transform so fundamentally? And I think when we're talking about Crowley, right, specifically with art, he was not a fan of being temperate about anything. So, yeah. Fun stuff. Yeah, Alkin points out that the irises also point to Gabriel. Yep. That is a very good point. Could you speak on the alchemical connection between this card and the Lovers? So there, when we're talking about the Lovers, if we're talking specifically about Waite, right? There's not really there is some connection there. The Lovers really, when we're talking about the history of tarot and the meaning of tarot, the Lovers really is about choice. Even when we're talking about the Lovers in the Waite pack, right? The card is about choice, right? And us having free will. That's why when you look at the Lovers card, in Waite's, let me see if I can pull it up here. That's why they're presented in the Garden of Eden, and it's that idea of making a choice, right? Of choosing to continue to live in blissful ignorance or have the forbidden knowledge, right? The knowledge of good and evil. Okay. And I talked about this somewhat in the Lovers discussion. So if you're interested in that, I would definitely go back and watch that episode. It is available there. You can just go to the blog post on my website, and the video would be there, or you can go to, in the description box down below, there is a link to the playlist for the full Tarot Deep Dive series, and you can check it out there. So in terms of alchemy, and in terms of Crowley's card, there's a connection between the Lovers and art. In terms of Waite and more traditional, like Marseille, there's not as much of a direct correlation. I think hopefully that answers your question. But if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I would go check out my video on the Lovers, and check out my video. Well, we haven't got to the Devil yet, but we will talk about some of that in the Devil, because the Lovers are more closely associated with the Devil card than anything else. Is the temptation what? Sorry. What's the context of your question, Melissa? Is it still there in what? I think I missed that. Yeah, there is a lot of symbolism in this card, specifically in the context of Waite's card, right? There is a crap ton of symbolism there. And again, if you guys have questions or anything like that you think of later, you're more than welcome to come back and leave it as a comment. So let me make sure I'm not missing other questions. I don't know if Melissa's still there or not. Is the temptation symbol still there? Are we talking about in Lovers? In the Lovers? Yes. So yeah, Temperance. Lots of fun stuff there. It is really interesting though to look at how the meaning of this card evolved, right? Like, I think that's the most fascinating thing about Temperance to me, is like, when we look at a lot of the cards in the Major Arcana, there's a clear evolution, right? Even when we're talking about cards that transformed fundamentally, like the Magician, where he went from kind of the snake oil salesman to the manifestation of power, right? There's a very definitive, clear line. But this one just kind of seems to be the wild card. Oh, yeah. Okay. So you're talking about the idea of temptation within Temperance in the Waite Smith card. No, not necessarily. That is definitely one thing that is not there. There's obviously some ideas of sort of sexual temptation in the previous cards, right? Especially when we look at Dodal. Dodal really emphasized that by kind of like intentionally bringing attention to her breasts, right? Or in the same idea here within the early Italian deck, the Visconti Sforza, we see kind of her showing a little bit of leg, right? That's definitely something that kind of leaves the visual language of the Waite-Smith card. So yeah. Yep. I understand now. Thank you. Sorry. Sometimes like my brain just doesn't follow quite like that, and I'm still not through my first full cup of coffee today. So I'm a little pre-coffee brained as well too. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? So this series will continue. We will keep doing them. So there will be another episode next month. So you can look forward to that. We're going to be talking about the Devil card, which will be fun because that's a big one, right? That has a lot of interesting history. And obviously that Hollywood super loves to throw out when talking about tarot. So yeah. Well, if you guys have any other questions that come to mind, don't hesitate to come back and leave a comment. I do super appreciate all of you coming to hang out with me and to take this deep dive into the tarot. As always, the blog post is there for you guys to use as notes. All of the references that if any of this is interesting to you, there are a ton of books that I use to reference, kind of put all these things together. There is a full list of references on each blog post, so you can use that as a springboard to further your own kind of studies or curiosities. So be sure to check that out. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. The YouTube algorithm loves thumbs ups. And yeah, I super duper appreciate all of you. Lots of fun stuff coming. I am super working hard on getting the Discord server up and running for memberships. Once I have that done and I get some emotes made, we will fire up memberships on the channel. Reviews are coming. They're putting final touches on stuff. Hopefully one will actually go out tomorrow, if I can get all of the editing done today. And yeah, you guys are amazing, and I super appreciate all of you so very much for your continued love and support. Yeah, I hope all of you guys have a wonderful, wonderful Sunday. It's crazy windy here, so I'm probably going to stay inside. So have an amazing day, and always remember and never forget that everyone is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. So be kind. Always. We'll see you guys around YouTube. Bye, everybody.